Caddis Maximus here, this time doing a review and comparison of all these Proto breaker bars and ratchets. I've been wanting to do a review like this for a while of just the Protos, but my 3/8 was a little buried. Now I'm getting into the line of 3/8 reviews. I thought it would be a good time to do this, and I have just been wanting to do a Proto only because I have 14 different pieces here. We have 7 ratchets and 7 breaker bars. So this will be a video for people who are really interested in the various vintages and types of Proto ratchets and breaker bars. I don't have obviously the full selection. There's a ton of different ratchets and breaker bars from Proto, but these are the common ones. And Proto Tools do show up used relatively often, especially like on eBay and Craigslist. Let's just start off with which would be the more modern, standard, straight handle, standard length ratchet. This is a 1/4" drive, and they're made pretty well. They have what's known as a floating pawl, and it has one large pawl that the switch activates. So it has it's a 72 tooth ratchet, but it has a really wide pawl, so it's supposed to be the equivalent in strength of a coarser tooth ratchet while giving you finer teeth. One thing that I've noticed about this little 1/4" that I've had, even though it's gotten better since it's broken in, initially when I got the ratchet, sometimes when you're ratcheting and you're putting strain on the anvil side to side, it would want to catch and self-reverse. And actually, you'd be ratcheting and then the handle, the little lever would just flip itself. And it seems to have gotten a little bit better. I did a review of Proto 1/4" drive tools, the little breaker bar and spinner handle, etc. And I showed the inside of this ratchet and how they work if you want to see that. Otherwise, these are pretty darn nice ratchets, and I do like the rounded end of the handle because it pinches your hand less sometimes when you're not quite on the handle fully. And they do have some pretty nice knurling on there. They're generally well built. And we'll take a look at this ratchet, which is my big breaker bar style ratchet. This is a Proto long handle 1/2" drive. And similar to the 1/4", I really like the rounded handle. The knurling is pretty nice and consistent on these, but I do wish it was a little more aggressive and grippy. Opposed from the 1/4", this 1/2", the mechanism has never given me any trouble. It just works better when it's scaled up to the 1/2". And it's really robust. I mean, the pawl in this ratchet is probably more than a 1/2" wide. And it has been just an absolute go-to for me. And it's really just a beautiful tool. One other thing I was going to mention about these Proto ratchets is they have a forged recess for the switch. So the switch isn't protruding so much from the top of the ratchet. And that helps partially prevent the switch from getting bumped while you're using it and it reversing itself, as well as when you set it down or drop it, it's less likely that the impact will directly hit the reverse switch and possibly damage it. This is a much older version of Proto. I guess it would be a basic ratchet. And it was interesting because they didn't stamp anywhere on this forging that's for Proto, but if on these old ones, whoop, there we go, you can see that they stamped it right on the bottom plate there. And so I've talked about these ratchets. They have these 2 little holes. They're pretty coarse. And I think maybe Proto is the one who initially had that design, although it's not patented. This ratchet has a pretty thin head, and compared to the older style round heads that Proto had, you can see that they may have made some sales of it just because it's a much lower profile head. And this is generally a pretty good ratchet. These mechanisms work pretty well, but it's like the most copied mechanism. Harbor Freight ratchets are the same style mechanism. They just don't have holes in it, and they're 72 tooth. Then we get to the traditional Proto roundhead ratchets. Some of these are by Challenger. When Proto bought out Challenger Tool Company, for a while they were doing this Challenger by Proto, and they're both effectively the same, except for on a breaker bar, and I'll show you that in a minute. I pulled these ratchets apart, and they're actually pretty good. They have 2 wide pawls, both active. a lot of ratchets that have two pawls, like in pair heads, one paw will be for reverse and one paw will be for forward. Both are active in this, so it's the forces are evenly balanced on the head, so it's a nice strong head, and you can hear that. It really has a solid ratcheting mechanism. In the top switch, you can see how this has gotten beat up, but they appear to be pretty solid, and you can always easily pick out these Proto ratchets because they have this distinctive kind of Chevrolet logo style reversing lever, and they of course are rebuildable. And they had older ones had a more square handle. Here's the odd section of the video where I forgot to do a close-up of the quick release round head Proto ratchet, so I'm inserting it into the review and covering up the tools that I'm doing for my next review, hiding them from you guys. So here's a quick release. It's more modern than those other Protos that I showed you, such as this one. And it's pretty nice, and they actually improved the reverse lever. I really like that. It looks like a heavier duty piece of metal than this one. And as you can see, it doesn't get quite as beat up as this one does, probably due to feedback that they received from their customers. The chrome and everything is a bit improved on these newer round heads as well, how you would expect. This is newer, but I think the newest ones have a rounded handle just like the pair heads. One thing I was going to mention is that the quick release version is particularly tall. You can see how much taller it is than the regular version. And then that really flat 3/8 ratchet, if we compare it to it, maybe anvil to anvil, we can see that it's almost twice as tall. So that's the one thing I would mention, is the round head's pretty nice, but it is a pretty darn tall. It's a inch and a half, almost an inch and a half tall from the button to the bottom of the anvil. Anyway, this is one of the funkiest ones. This would be an early long handle round head ratchet. As you can see, it's been pretty used and gotten kind of rusty. The Proto for a long time really liked turning down their handles so they were pretty thin, and I don't mind that. They don't do that as much anymore. And the head is the same. This would be considered not a roto head. They have this, it's ground. I don't know if that's intentional, but it will only go forward this far before it stops. It is indexed. The fit and finish on this old flex head, isn't the greatest, to tell you the truth. But it has had a nice head. You can see even the grinding on top is kind of lopsided. And so that's always kind of been Proto Tools. Sometimes they're a little funky looking, and that's just the way it is. And here's a 1/2 inch stripe. It's interesting they use the same size reverse lever as they do on a 3/8. And the same ratchet mechanism, it's just a little taller for strength. Let's go and get into the breaker bars and we can finish up on this video. We have all the different sizes of breaker bars. This is a really new one, and a 1/4 inch, and they're pretty nice, although this one wasn't manufactured quite perfectly. It's still a nice little breaker bar. I guess the biggest issue is that these, if you can see there, the fork is like spread apart or was not cut correctly, and so the spring doesn't have enough tension. And I've had trouble getting that replaced because it's not broken, even though it doesn't function very well. We'll go to the 1/2 inch so I can compare to the 3/8. The more traditional Protos are like this, where they have the nice steel with a rounded insert, of course stamped on the beam. And it seems on the 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch they had this press fit handle, and this is the only breaker bar I've ever seen with a press fit handle. I'm not sure why they chose to do it that way, but it's interesting, and I kind of like the look. And these have been really a nice strong breaker bar for me. If we compare this 3/8, this is a 3/8 Proto by Challenger, or Challenger by Proto, and the difference is that it has a proportionally a kind of a thin pin in the center, and then it's just a block of 3/8 metal rather than being like that nice machined half rounded like it is on this Proto, or even the little 1/4 inch stripe. Here's the 3/4 inch. We'll get a little close up. It's just the same thing, larger. Proto on the 3/4 inch drives end up, excuse me here. use, instead of just a ball dentant, they use this steel pin. It's like a cross between a lock pin on impact wrenches and a ball dentant. So you can work the socket on and off by hand, but it holds it much more securely than just the ball bearing, because 3/4 inch the sockets and tooling starts getting pretty heavy. And I always just love making a video where I have an excuse to bring out this big Proto 1-inch drive breaker bar. And so I'll do that again here. And this doesn't have a press fit handle. It's just a one big forged piece of steel. Pretty heavy. You can see that in my hand. That's a breaker bar that really gets it done. And then on the T-handles, I just have a 1/4 inch. I have, surprisingly enough, the 1/4 inch and the 1 inch. It's just how it worked out. If you're going to order any little Proto 1/4 inch tool online, I would recommend the sliding T-handle. I think it's one of the nicest ones in the industry. It's really just a beauty. This one just how you wanted it. It just came out perfectly. Everything's perfectly straight and just how you wanted it, or would want it, I should say. And finally, here we have the big T-handle, and just like on the 1/4 inch, they drill out the center, I guess. Because it doesn't make much of a difference having that be totally solid, and that way they can easily insert ball bearings so that it has tension. And T-handles are really nice because they don't have that flex joint. They really deliver the force to the fastener effectively. And it's really handy when you get to the large sizes. And just to do a little comparison at the end of this video, 1/2 inch drive, to give you an idea, that's a 1/2 inch drive, 15/16 socket. That's a 3/4 inch drive, 15/16, and then this, as you can see, is a 1 inch drive. And if you want to compare socket thicknesses here, quite a bit of difference between all those. And 1/2 inch to 1 inch, you know, it's massive. Both turn the same size fastener, but there's a huge difference in the size of these sockets. So I always like doing that as well when I break out the big inch drive tools. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe. Catus Maximus out.